Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie. Nazywam się Mirella Panek-Owsiańska i mam dzisiaj wielką przyjemność prowadzić dla festiwalu Sektora 3.0 wywiad z dr Andreą Bonime-Blanc. Dr Andrea Bonime-Blanc, a global governance strategist, businesswoman, author, our dear guest. Hello, welcome from Warsaw.
Greetings from New York.
Andrea, you have the presentation for us, and then we'll have a few minutes for an interview. So the floor is yours.
Hello, Mirella. This is a wonderful day to be joining you virtually. I'm delighted to do so from New York City, and I am delighted to share with you some of the work that I've done over the years for NGOs and other kinds of organizations, business, governmental, on how you build resilient and sustainable organizations, especially in the turbulent times that we're living in. So the overview of what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 5 different what I call ESG and T megatrends, environmental, social, governance, and technology megatrends that are affecting all of our lives and affecting how we do business, how we do nonprofit work, how we do governmental work. Then I'm going to give you the 8 key elements of organizational resilience as I've built them over the years. And then I'm going to finish with the 10 commandments of resilient leadership, be it the management of a company or an organization like an NGO or the board of directors need to do to build resilient leadership. So let's start with the turbulent times we're living in. If you recall from your high school and school days, the Scylla and Charybdis myth that Ulysses and his men went through returning from the wars to their home illustrates a little bit to me the times that we're living in, unfortunately, of so many different things coming at us. You are in the middle of one of the most disruptive, terrible events in decades in Europe. But we've had other things happening like climate change, other societal issues, the pandemic, cyber warfare, and other things that are really affecting all of us. So I'm going to show you some of the most important megatrends that I believe are out there in the environmental, social, governance. And I've added a T for technology because I think technology is suffusing everything we do every day. And we need to add some of those really important issues, risks, and opportunities that affect your work as an NGO every day and that affect our work as human beings on Earth. So if you look at this list, and we're not going to go into detail, but there's many different categories of issues, risks, and opportunities that we've all talked about under environmental, under social, and under governance. But there's also a number of issues that we don't always talk about and that we should be incorporating in this discussion of ESG and T megatrends. It includes cyber insecurity, AI ethics, deep learning, robotics, misinformation, disinformation, nanotechnology, and I could go on. But the point is that we need to think about these issues as a holistic set of issues that affect our day-to-day work as the NGO community, in the nonprofit world, on behalf of the most important stakeholders that you serve, the stakeholders that are beneficiaries, that are the people in need, that are the people that are your most important stakeholders. So let me give you the 5 megatrends that I think are so important to think about as we do our work every day. But they are things that are going on a multi-year basis, and they're really affecting how we do our work every day. The first megatrend is what I call tech disruption at the speed of light. And these photographs on this slide speak louder than words. And you can see facial recognition, robotic dogs, robots taking over work, the metaverse. These are all things that are issues that we need to deal with in our day-to-day work. And these are issues that can be both risks and opportunities. Clearly opportunities to do our work faster, maybe better, with more data, more information, but also there are risks of discrimination, of unethical behavior, of abuse. So these are the kinds of themes that go through all of these megatrends. The second one is about how leadership and institutional trust by stakeholders has been declining steadily for many years. And this is the Edelman Trust Barometer, which came out this year, which shows 4 institutions and how stakeholders view them on an XY axis of unethical to ethical and incompetent to competent. And you can see that both business and NGOs are in the upper right-hand quadrant of both being ethical and being competent. Business is seen as a slightly more competent and less ethical. NGOs are seen as slightly more ethical, not as competent, but still in the positive quadrant. So this is very important to remember when we think about the resilience imperative, what leaders need to do. Leaders in NGOs need to think seriously about improving the competency piece and continuing to improve on the ethical piece. The third most important megatrend is complex interconnected risk intensifying. And these are graphs from the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report from this year. And it's really important to understand how these big categories of risk, and they have 5 categories of risk. In green is the environmental, red is societal, blue is economic, and orange is geopolitical. There's also a 5th category, which is technology, which isn't really very clearly represented in these graphs. And the reason is that these are graphs that show the most severe risks on a global scale over the next 10 years, dominated by the environmental risks, as you can see from the green, and by the societal risk, which from last year, we're talking about the pandemic. This year, we're going to have a whole bunch of additional societal risks that have emerged through this invasion by Russia of Ukraine and all the reverberations from a humanitarian, social, immigration, etc. The 4th megatrend is global geopolitical tectonics shifting, and they're shifting very dramatically right now, as you know, with the conflagration in Europe as a manifestation of 2 sides that are really sort of forming worldwide, the pro-democracy side and the autocracy side. So we have had a few years, even more than a decade, of democracy decline in a lot of democracies and the rise of autocracies, but we've also had more international governance chaos in the sense of some of the institutions that we have had for the last 70, 80 years are showing signs of fraying. However, the Ukraine conflagration is changing that potentially, with NATO and the EU suddenly becoming more cohesive. And the last megatrend that we're all dealing with is this idea of stakeholder capitalism rising. And this is really important because this is where there's a change taking place, a transformation, multi-year transformation in how business does business. And this has very important implications for the nonprofit sector. And so the stakeholder capitalism means that businesses are paying attention more and more beyond the shareholders and the owners to employees, to customers, and some of the others in their supply chain, many of whom are NGOs. And so there's real opportunity as well as risk involved in this particular megatrend. So let me talk about what a resilient and sustainable NGO is. And there are 8 elements that I see. The most important one of all is the idea that you have either responsible or enlightened leadership. And I have a few photographs of business leaders that I consider to be at the top, like Paul Polman and Satya Nadella of Unilever, ex-Unilever, and Microsoft, who really look at ESG and technology issues as issues that they need to take responsibility for, be leaders about, set the tone, walk the talk, and also provide the resources. And then you have the lower level leaders, the superficial leaders, who don't really think about ESG&T issues as more than a marketing tool or a PR tool, or worse, in the case of Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, who has been convicted of committing crimes. Those are irresponsible leaders or superficial or the greenwashing kind of leaders. But the ones that are really setting the tone are the responsible and the enlightened. And I want to make a point of this because this applies just as much to the NGO world. Who is your executive director? Who's on your board of directors or board of trustees? These are incredibly important things. So this is the generic resilience life cycle. It's an organizational resilience model where I have 8 different elements, and the most important start at the very top, and then they kind of all reinforce the next ones going around the circle. It's governance, it's culture, it's knowing your stakeholders, it's risk management, it's strategic, holistic development, performance metrics, crisis preparedness, and improvement. And I'm going to show you in this slide, it's a very busy slide, but there are 4 different kinds of organizational resilience, starting with the vicious resilience life cycle, where several of these elements don't exist or are very poor, weak. Then the fragile resilience life cycle, where there's some sign of life in these elements. The robust and the virtuous are the most well-developed. And this is where we have what you see on this slide, which is a more or less well-developed 8 elements of resilience. And I will talk about them for a moment and reference the Platform for Social Impact, which is a client of mine in Puerto Rico that is an NGO that basically is implementing this whole approach to their own organizational resilience, long-term sustainability, and impact for their stakeholders. They're dedicated to eradicating childhood poverty in Puerto Rico, which is one of the worst in the United States. But they also want to create ecosystems of support for the communities they serve, the families, the parents, the educators, the staff. And so I'm going to quickly run through these 8 elements as it applies to an NGO. So lean in governance means that you have the best board of directors that you can possibly have, of people who are supporting the mission, who understand the values, and who are really providing that leadership tone from the top and access to resources that are needed for the organization. And I call that lean in governance. The second most important thing is empowered integrity. This is a culture that is supportive, mutually respectful, that has ethics at its core, that allows people to speak up without fear of anything happening to them or to others, that is a culture of speak up, listen up, and follow up. So this is a culture that is non-toxic. It's the opposite. So empowered integrity is truly, truly important for any organization, including an NGO. The next one is what I call stakeholder EQ, emotional intelligence. It's knowing who your most important stakeholders are, what their expectations are, and being able to cater to them properly. And in an NGO setting, that becomes critically important because resources are often not ample, and you want to be able to get the full bang for your money, so to speak, helping the most people that you can. And in the context of the Platform for Social Impact, that's helping the most children in poverty. But in the case of many of you, I'm sure you have a whole set of priorities that you need to think about. But it's very important to get this straight. The next one is having risk intelligence. Risk intelligence is all about understanding what your most important risks are, mitigating your risks, finding ways to solve those risks and address those risks. The next one is incorporating your most important risks and opportunities, including the environmental, the social, the governance, and the technology, into your business strategy. As an NGO, you have a business strategy, you have a budget, you need to be able to incorporate those issues properly into your strategy. The next one is metrics. It's all about what I call performance equilibrium, having the right metrics, the right KPIs, the right way to measure your progress, to measure your successes, to understand when successes don't happen, and understand how to create incentives with your management team, with your executive director, and really put the rubber put the rubber on the road, so to speak. The seventh most important element is this idea of crisis readiness. Clearly, you're living through one of the biggest crises that we have seen in many of our lifetimes. And it's really being prepared for that crisis, having the crisis management plan, having the team, having the communications capabilities to deal with the many things that are coming at you during a crisis. And the issue really is also having the business continuity plan, being able to continue doing the work that you were doing in the midst of a crisis, and then being able to protect the data and other things during that process. And then last but not least, what I call innovation ethos is a sense of continuous improvement, of seeing when mistakes have happened, of correcting for those mistakes, creating better processes and practices. So that is my resilience life cycle. And I will conclude with just a few tips for the business leaders, the NGO leaders, the board members who are part of your NGOs. It's really about seriously integrating some of the things we just talked about. So understanding those environmental, social, governance, and technology issues that are most relevant to your organization and incorporating them both as risks and as opportunities into your strategy. Making sure that you're empowering and supporting cross-functional teams of the right people to address the right kinds of issues within your organization. Making sure that you understand the issues, the risks, the opportunities, and how you create and protect value. The resilient leader walks the talk, supports the mission, the vision, the values, and also does it not just speaking, but does it as budgetary and resource allocations. Hopefully your resilient leaders aspire to be responsible leaders or enlightened leaders as per that typology that I showed you earlier. Leaders like this are really focused on building and institutionalizing the culture of integrity, which is so important to maintain a smooth running operation. They're also attuned to and understand the global megatrends that affect their organization, as we discussed earlier. And resilient leaders also really know who their most important stakeholders are, and they engage with them, they understand them, they understand their expectations. They allow for mistakes to be made, and they really promote the speak up, listen up culture that leads to continuous improvement, innovation, and sustainability. And resilient leaders are looking at the long-term horizon as well as the medium and the short term. Last but not least, resilient leaders welcome oversight from their board of directors, board of governors, board of trustees, or some governmental entity that might have oversight responsibility for them.
Andrea, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. And of course, I have many questions, but we have only 20 minutes for this interview. So let's start that our main topic this year is trust. So during the whole festival, we will talk how to build the trust. Should we trust technology, or whether trust could be a new currency for social organizations, and so on and so on. So if we talk about trusting non-profit sector, we need to start from ethics and compliance. And I wonder if you would agree with me that business sector has more developed instruments in that field. I do not know any compliance officer working for an NGO. Maybe in the US you know such a person, but not in Poland. And maybe for NGOs it's very obvious, so we don't have to somehow measure or improve our ethics. We are already seen as very ethical in the Edelman barometer trust you showed in your slide. So maybe if we are talking about ESG, the E is enough for us, and we do not need any G. Would you agree?
Well, there's a lot of great questions in your statement, and so let me break it down a little bit if I can. So first of all, it is great that NGOs are perceived as more ethical than any other institution, because after all, the mission is really important, and it's socially focused. It's slightly less competent than business, according to this survey, but it's more competent than government and media. So that's a good thing. What happens at NGOs is that resources are very limited. There's always a scramble for additional funding, and it's difficult, very often very difficult to attract the funders and the donations and so on, the support that is needed. But I would suggest that it's extraordinarily important for NGOs to do what they can do to create those internal ethics and compliance structures appropriate to their size, appropriate to their footprint. I would never suggest that an NGO that is a small NGO have an ethics and compliance officer, for example. But there are people within an organization that can wear multiple hats, and I've done that in my past when I was, a general counsel of a startup company. I also was the ethics and compliance officer, and I did crisis management and risk management. So the same thing can happen in a smaller NGO, perhaps. But I think it's really the most important thing is that the leadership, meaning the executive director and the board, understand that this is really important for purposes of building resilience, of building trust from the donor community, building trust from the stakeholder community, the beneficiaries, and also creating that internal culture of integrity that is so important to be where your staff is able to speak up without fear of retaliation, where they will be listened to, where problems are solved early so that risks don't get out of control. So I think all of your points there are really important. I think that NGOs should think about this proactively and do something about it proactively, but they shouldn't be spending time looking for a new staff member or spending a lot of extra money. Just what do you have within your organization, and then get a little extra help. So you can have external help, and you can also have someone internal wearing multiple hats. So I think those are some of the solutions, or some of the things that NGOs can do to really promote that internal culture of integrity. And the last thing I'll say is some of the bigger NGOs definitely do have people in these roles. I know the World Wildlife Fund, for example, is a very big NGO, had a chief, or has a chief ethics and compliance officer, and a few others that I know, but they're very multi-million-dollar kind of large organizations.
Okay, I'm happy that you do not ask small NGOs to have a compliance officer right now. I'm glad to hear it. So let's talk about resilience, because it's a very strange word for nonprofits. If I can tell you, why it's important to build a resilient organization, and how it's possible to build one. Is it really something we need to survive or to develop our organization? Or, is it another fancy academic theory or fancy consultant theory? Is it really helpful for us to survive the turbulent times? I'm asking it because, for example, many Polish humanitarian and migrant NGOs had to face the challenge of war in Ukraine, and 2 million refugees who reached our eastern border during 1 month. And I've talked to many of them, and they have many needs right now, like volunteers, money, knowledge, how to scale up. But nobody talked actually about resilience. So do you believe it's something we really need?
So thank you for that very, very sharp and good question, because I agree with you. We don't want to have fancy sort of consultant speak and things like that taking place, especially right now when organizations are struggling mightily to deal with some of the biggest challenges of our times. And so what I'm suggesting with the concept of organizational resilience, and I walked everybody through the 8 elements just now, and I can share some materials with you if people want to read about it some more. Really what it is, it's a long-term plan. It's not something that you suddenly say, oh, I'm going to be resilient. It really goes back to, are the leaders thinking about the long-term sustainability and strength, internal strength of their organization, with the purpose of achieving their mission, with the purpose of their beneficiaries. So the whole point here is really focus on mission, vision, and values of the NGO, and then build the people and the structures that will allow you to serve them in a time of such crisis as right now, for example. And this is an ongoing crisis. This is going to continue for weeks, months, and unfortunately probably years in terms of the impacts, even if the war ends soon, which we all hope and pray for. But there will be reverberations that will continue for years. And so what I'm suggesting is by looking at this sort of circular or this cycle of resilience, is really, those are things that you already have in your organization potentially. And if you don't have them, think about, making them a little bit stronger. If you haven't thought about doing a risk exercise once a year, let's say, to understand what your most important risks are, do that, because that's not just important for the moment. It's important for the long-term planning of the organization, the budgeting, the resources. And I would suggest that resilience is something that, if you have it, allows you to serve your beneficiaries and your stakeholders so much better and so much more continuously than if you don't have it. And I shared that I'm working with this NGO in Puerto Rico, Platform for Social Impact. This is exactly what they're thinking about. They're saying governance and ethics and transparency are things we need to have embedded in everything we do, because we need to prove to the Puerto Rican community that we are transparent, trustworthy, worthy of more funds that can then go into our mission, which is really to serve more and more of our constituents and giving them more and more opportunities to come out of poverty, to get educations, to be healthy. And so these are things that feed on each other. That's why I like to call it a resilience life cycle or cycle. And when it really works well, it's a responsible cycle or a virtuous cycle. And when it doesn't, I call it fragile or vicious. But it's really back to the governance, back to the leaders. They have to have that vision of not just the short term, but building this into the long term. So I agree with you that you can see a lot of fancy consultants speak out there, but I'm talking about doing something from inside and doing it steadily and over time to build that ability to really have an impact on your stakeholders and your mission.
If you put it like this, it sounds really better. And so the third question, the third issue I would like to ask you is about leadership. Now the entire world is admiring the leadership style of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's courageous, he's sincere, he's close to his people, and he's trusted by them. So would you call him or consider him a resilient leader? And the second part of this question is that we have more and more good examples of female leadership, starting from Angela Merkel or President of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, or your Vice President, Kamala Harris. Do you think that the era of women leaders is really coming, or gender and female qualities are more important in resilient leadership?
Great questions, and I'll take one at a time here. First and foremost, I think Ukrainian President Zelensky is truly the prototype I was thinking of when I thought about enlightened leaders in that 4 category typology that I shared earlier. He's not just someone who's taking responsibility for everything that's going on. I mean, he was the president before this event, this war, and he's risen to the occasion in a way that I don't think anybody expected, and above and beyond. And that's because he has the intrinsic characteristics and qualities of what I call an enlightened leader or a resilient leader. He basically understands all of his stakeholders, the people in his country, their expectations for protection, for peacemaking, for war making if necessary, to protect them. And he's doing it in an amazingly emotionally intelligent way. So he clearly has those characteristics and qualities of a great leader. And it's only come out, I guess, really forcefully in the last 6 weeks with the war going on. And thank God for that, because if you had a lesser leader at this time, I think there would be consequences that would be worse for Ukraine than having this leader that everybody can have trust in. So getting back to that comment and that theme of trust, it's about the stakeholders trusting and the world leaders trusting. I mean, the world has come together in a way that, again, none of us could have expected. And certainly Poland has stepped up to this amazing, incredible crisis, humanitarian crisis as well. So we have the world coming together in a certain way, and they're inspired and they have trust in President Zelensky, which is really something. And he is resilient because he is adapting. He has the lean-in governance that I was talking about. He's creating a culture of trust around him. He's focused on his stakeholders. He understands the risks. He's incorporating it into his strategy. He's creating very good metrics. He's using social media in a way that nobody ever has before in a situation like this. He is crisis ready like nobody else has ever been. And he's creating innovation. So he fits that whole series of elements of resilience. So yes, he's a beautiful example of a resilient and enlightened leader. And then to the second part of your question about women leaders, female leaders, one of the things that I noticed during the pandemic was, and again, maybe this is not causational, but correlational, but many of the countries that were run by women were doing a lot better on the pandemic for the first couple of years or year than a lot of the other countries. And maybe it was coincidence, but I have a feeling that there are also some intrinsic qualities that women can bring to the table. Not all women, obviously, but you mentioned Jacinda Ardern. I think she's another prototype of, just like President Zelensky, of an emotionally intelligent leader who understands her country, her people, the needs, the risks, etc. Also, the president of Taiwan, she's like that as well. So you have these people, who are emotionally intelligent, are thinking about community first. They're thinking about the needs of the people, and they're catering to that as best they can under the circumstances. So I think there is a quality of leadership, which men can have too. Obviously, Zelensky has it, which we could call more feminine or more female, which is this empathy, emotional intelligence, ability to also attract people and to trust them, basically. And words, acts speak louder than words, of course. And so you have to prove that every day, and it doesn't just happen. But I think that women actually bring a unique set of qualities to this resilience discussion, because we also are the ones who protect our children the most, our families. We're seeing that very sadly unfolding in Ukraine right now, with the women and the children being protected by the women mostly, and so on and so forth. And the men, of course, are doing an amazing job as well. But so I think both of your questions were right spot on, and I agree with your thoughts there.
Okay, Andrea, thank you very, very much. It was really a pleasure to hear your presentation and the answers to my questions. Thank you very much for being our guest, and we are saying hello from Warsaw to New York.
Thank you so much, and I say back hello to Warsaw. I've been to your beautiful city and hope to be back one day, and wish everyone the best, and thank everyone in Poland for everything that you're doing, all the NGOs and all the people in the government for being on the front lines of a very terrible situation, hopefully making it better every day.
Thank you very much. And proszę Państwa, jeśli ktoś chciałby poczytać więcej o tym, o czym mówiła Andrea, oczywiście polecamy również jej książkę. Bardzo niedawno ukazała się Gloom to Boom. Rozwinięcie megatrendów, rozwinięcie kwestii rezyliencji i kwestii przywództwa. W tej książce naprawdę znajdziecie Państwo bardzo dużo informacji, a ja bardzo dziękuję za dzisiejsze spotkanie.